This is All the Things with Michelle Wolfe.
Well, I'm joined today with Nick Brancato, author of the book Prioritize Us: Unlock Lasting Love with One Simple Proven Test. So, Nick, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you came up with this. Because I really want to say, I really enjoyed, from a science perspective, and I told you a little bit about my background in psychometric scale development and things like that. This really spoke to me.
Thank you so much. So I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
And I am a relationship systems architect. So I design frameworks to facilitate relationship growth. And I do personal development coaching and couples coaching. And I developed a structured, data-driven approach to relationships because love alone isn't enough. And my system helps couples measure alignment, predict conflict, and create intentional foundation for success, because it's not a lack of love that breaks up couples, it's misaligned priorities. And that's what my book Prioritize Us is all about.
Yeah, when we talked originally, I think that's a place that I think that's why I connected with this so much, because I do look at relationships from an alignment standpoint. And so this really spoke to me because not only is sort of, alignment on so many things, spirituality, values, which your book talks a lot about. But even just for me, energetic alignment, all those things that play into it. So this was when I was reading this, it was just yes, I just found myself going, yes, all the time.
That's so awesome to hear. Thank you. That's amazing feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So I basically developed Prioritize Us. It was born during a deeply personal and challenging time in my life. My wife was experiencing serious mental health issues, and we had no idea what was happening. And it was very unclear. And eventually she was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And so despite the severity of the situation, our relationship actually improved during this crisis. We used to have previous communication struggles and small arguments, and we spoke very different languages. But then all of a sudden, health and safety became our top priorities, and everything sort of clicked. For the first time, we were perfectly aligned. And this realization sort of sparked an aha moment that having the same priorities results in everything becoming easier. So if I applied this to the rest of our relationship and take a look at what all our priorities are instead of just the top few. So I began identifying and ranking 10 core priorities, realizing that couples often argue about surface level issues while the real conflict is actually coming from somewhere else. And so then I compared the priorities to each other objectively, and I created the total difference score, or TDS, which is a data-driven tool that measures priority alignment and misalignment between partners. Then I tested this in my coaching practice and found that all kinds of hidden misalignments were coming up. And it really helped people communicate better just by understanding their own priorities and then also their partners. And so then the book was born.
I love it. And then so the 10 priorities that you have in here, you have career, communication, entertainment, finances, growth, health, relationships, safety, sex, and spirituality. How did you come up with the 10 categories?
So I went through a lot of narrowing down of general lists that people, generally prioritize in their life. I wanted to make sure that priorities was different than values, because a lot has been written about values, that values are ancient, from ancient Greece to Rome. Everybody's been writing about values. It's in Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. He talks about it a lot. It's an amazing book. And
you hear that all the time, right? That your values should align. Make sure your values align.
Values are objective and stable. They don't change. They don't waver, but priorities shift over time. What's important today may not be what's as important tomorrow, and certainly not a year from now, especially if there's significant life changes going on.
Yeah.
So priorities is actually a fairly new word. It's only a little over 100 years old. Before that, there was just priority, because life was much simpler. And so there was just what was most important to you. Now, modern life is so much more complicated that we have priorities, many important things to us that we're juggling. And so it's really new struggles that humans are struggling with, I think.
And it is an important distinction because, like you said, like values are sort of, they probably can shift over time, right? But
Yes,
not really, like that's not very common. Like what your values are probably will stay with you or like strengthen over time. But like your priorities do change. And like you said, when you were in your relationship, like you had whatever priorities you had, but then when health things come up, suddenly that gets prioritized. And then that's a place that you can come together. So that's a beautiful thing.
yeah, it really is. It's amazing that something wonderful can be born out of a crisis.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do like to find the silver lining in things. But I think that in relationship, especially like when we go through hard stuff, that is a time when you can see like they'll say, it'll make or break you and your relationship because there are people that maybe go through hard things together and that can really break them. But I'm happy to see that it was actually a positive thing for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy about it too. And so often, negative things or turmoil does shake up relationships and maybe end them sometimes. But I think it's mostly a lack of communicating any of these shifting priorities. So
Mm.
when one partner changes and might change in a different way from the other partner, if the other partner stays the same, and they don't make these discussions regularly, they're going to have trouble eventually.
How often do you recommend like reassessing priorities?
Certainly at least every 6 months, really every month. Like it doesn't take very long. It's like 2 to 5 minutes to do it yourself. And then to
Mm.
compare it, the math is very easy, another couple of minutes. And then you have your answer and you could just see an objective measurement of where you're at with your partner. It's just so valuable.
The way that the scoring is it's a 1 through 10 answer, and you do it and your partner does it, and then you compare and see the difference, and that's why it's the total difference score. And then you from there make decisions about how you address those differences.
Exactly. So if I ranked career number one and you ranked it number six, the difference would be a five.
Mhm.
So in that example, we're not that close together, but we're not as far apart. It could be as far apart as a nine or as close together as a zero. So you rank all 1 through 10. And then once you compare each one to the other, you get a total different score.
And so I know you address this in the book, but I want to say it out loud. If I and my partner find that we have gaps, is that like a sign of distress?
Okay, that's a great question. So if you and your partner have gaps, that's completely normal. Everybody's going to have gaps. Really, a perfect score is almost never going to happen. It's like 1 in a trillion. So you don't really have to worry about it. So no one's really going to get a zero. Everybody's going to get a score, probably more in like the 10 to 40 range.
Mhm.
Less than that's not as common in both directions. So if you find out you have differences, it's just a point of conversation. I would start by focusing on the areas that have the biggest number difference. So if there's like a 1 and a 10, I'd start there for sure. If you're having trouble starting there, then it's okay to start with the areas that are aligned. Those are actually the pillars of your relationship. So if you look where your strengths are, where you're aligned, and ask each other why it's important to the other person that's a high priority to them,
Mhm.
that answer is probably going to surprise you, and it'll be pleasant because you're going to agree in some way, and then you can have the conversations go from there to areas where you're more surprised by each other's answers, and you will be surprised.
Yeah, I like that. I like that you can kind of like it gives you it's a talking point. It gives you a place to start, like you said. So if I feel like for me, I'd be like, oh, I see this difference. Let's talk about that. But maybe it would be a good thing to switch that and be like, well, let's talk about these places that we're aligned because then you can maybe flow into your differences with a little bit more ease. So
Absolutely. And you can dive into what about that topic makes you aligned and what do the details look like. Like paint a picture for each other. Don't just give like analytical answers. Say what that future of that priority looks like. The more you can paint a picture for your partner, the more they can help you achieve what you're going for. It's so important to have a shared vision and to bring your separate visions together.
Yeah. Do you think that I feel like this is a great tool for um, just like guiding communication? Because I think communication is it's such a, I mean, everybody says, communication is key. And I really feel like it is in any relationship, not just like your partner, but like in any relationship, you have to be able to communicate. And something that we struggle to communicate so much about is our differences. So I feel like it's a really great guide for like working through that, because it's so important. And you don't have to be alike, like the best relationships, arguably, maybe you could disagree with me if you want,
Hmm.
um, are the ones where we do have differences, and that those differences like invite us to expand and grow.
Absolutely. You complement in some fashion. I
Mhm.
think that everybody is kind of like a piece of Swiss cheese. We all have like gaps in our knowledge, but you don't know where the gaps are necessarily, and they're all different. So if I know 60 things about life and you know 60 things about life, we're not going to know the same 60, and we can help plug each other's gaps. And you have to know what you don't know before you can learn it. So when someone's different from you, they're going to do a lot of churning of ideas and of priorities and values, and they're going to make you think about things and reflect. And that can all be extremely positive for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, I think those relationships are really great for like personal growth. And that, is probably something I would say is like in our values. And you have to potentially have that as a shared value, in those relationships where you're going to have more of a difference.
Yes, growth is actually a sort of a controversial priority, because when one person values growth highly and the other person doesn't, that can actually lead to a lot of stress in the relationship, because you're trying to use your time quite differently in that
Yeah.
situation. So there's a lot more to talk about.
Yeah, I would say, and we have such a great relationship, so I feel like I can talk about it, but I feel like that was something that was misaligned in my marriage, and it like ended up resulting in divorce. Because we do view, like, I'm here for growth. I know that. Like, I came here, I want to learn everything that I can about myself. I'm fascinated by human behavior. That's why I do this. And he was very much like fine with just sort of like being even keel and not really interested in wanting to look at himself or whatever. And those aren't criticisms about him. He's a wonderful person. But we just don't align there. And, so when we would have conversations, especially around conflict, which you have to be able to do, that was not like that was really hard to overcome, because
Wow.
me, I really need a partner who is going to be interested in self inquiry and go and be interested in that mirror that we provide for each other. Um, so yeah.
Yes, the mirror is so valuable. But I'm sorry that you had to go through that. That's divorce is never easy.
No.
Being with one partner and it being not the right fit that you find out is challenging. And that's one of the things about the Prioritize Us test, is that if you take it early on in your relationship, you can uncover a lot of these things. So there's really no wrong time to take the test. If you're just getting started, or if you've been together a long time, you're gonna learn something different, something
Yeah.
new.
Yeah. I mean, it was what we met in college. Like we
Ah,
things where you're learning so much about yourself. You just don't even really know who you are still. And those relationships are challenging, because if you don't, like, we're all on our own growth journey. And if you're not, like, we don't all grow at the same pace either, so somebody might go a little bit further and then you catch up and you kind of do that dance. But you know, we learned so much in that time together, and we're such great friends. Like, I love our relationship now.
oh wow.
You know,
That's amazing.
I know, and I'm grateful for that. And it feels like the right thing.
Oh, that's great. I'm
Yeah.
so happy to hear that. It's
No,
really good.
that because it's scary when you don't know, and we share children, and but for us, I would say, like, as part of our values, but also a shared priority that would be high on our list, is like our family, our children. So
Yes.
really value like showing up for them, prioritizing them. And we both understand that for them to have the best experience that they can, that we need to find ways to work together. And even if that's not as a married couple, but just as like the relationship that we have. So
That's so powerful.
thank
It
you.
really is. Yeah. It's amazing because so often people never get to that place. They don't recognize the pillar that is their relationships with their children, and that priority can set you up for success. If you both value it, everything else can sort of fall into place from there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you know, for my children's experience, like I, because we get along so much better now, like their experience with us is much more positive than it was when we were having conflict and arguing and having to like hide, you know, and what, like your kids can feel that. So
Sure.
it really does. It was one of those things where, you know, you stay together because you think that the nuclear family is, you know, is ideal, but sometimes it's not. And if it isn't a match, it's okay to do the right thing for yourself and prioritize yourself, make yourself happy. Like my kids are so much happier now. You know, I'm sure they don't love the back and forth of having to do that, but they're like my time with them and the way that we bond is so beautiful. And I love that for him too. Like I see that for him too. And I'm like, I love that, you know? Um, and we're probably not like everybody in the way that, I mean, we still will get together and do like, he'll be like, I'm making this dinner if you want to come over, and I'll do the same. Cause,
Oh,
you know, like I
that's awesome.
love him as a person. So I don't expect everybody to be able to do that, but I don't know, somehow we made that work and I'm really grateful.
Well, you guys both made really good decisions early on that you loved each other as people.
Yes.
So you made a lot of good decisions, micro decisions early on about each other. And you knew that you wanted to be in each other's lives and that part could work. And so that's really important. A lot of people never do the check. They just think romantic relationships. They don't think about all the other things that are involved in a long-term relationship or a marriage. Like it's also a business partnership. It's also so many things. It's a friendship, a best friendship.
Yes.
It affects every aspect of your life because how you feel about yourself and your emotional state is going to tremendously impact how you perform. Like when I was doing a lot of poker training and poker coaching, if people's mindset was off, there's no way you can perform in like a 10, 12, 14-hour day of just making decisions about cards and trying to be really focused. And so I often discovered that people's relationship turmoil ended up on the tables, and that happens with any job or career or hobby. If
Mhm.
there's a problem in your relationships, everything else falls apart. Even your life expectancy is lower. There was an amazing Harvard study, like an 85-year study that's still going on, where they pretty conclusively proved that or showed that the success of you in life and your life expectancy and happiness level and all of this ties directly into the quality of your relationships.
I just saw that actually. So I'm glad that you mentioned
Yeah.
it. It is. And it speaks so much to like, we are, you know, the sentient beings that we are, like, we're social, like we're here. Like, of course, you know, there's something to be said for taking care of yourself, being independent. I believe in, you know, autonomy, self-agency, but like we do need each other, and finding that balance of, you know, independence and interdependence. Um,
Yes.
it's an important dance to be able to do. And I think, what is it? There's like some saying that if like who the culmination of who you are is like if you look at the five closest people that you surround yourself with, right? So,
Yes.
you know, it's important to be mindful of the people that you let in, that you know, let influence you. Yeah.
It's critical. Yeah. You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I
Yeah.
really love that. And I think it's so true. You are what you consume, just like you are what you eat. You are the content you consume. You are the conversations that you have. If you're negative versus if you're positive, that's going to rub off on other people. It's going to spread and vice versa. So other people are going to rub off on you. So if you want to be positive and happy in your life, but you're surrounding yourself by people who are negative or pessimistic, that's going to be potentially very problematic.
Yes, I've had, I mean, in the last couple of years, even as I continue to grow, like I've seen how some relationships will sort of fall away because they don't like resonate with me anymore. Or you start to look at, you know, the content, like you said, of like those conversations. And it's like, and sometimes unfortunately, you don't know that right away. Like you have a relationship with somebody and it's going well, and you're kind of both putting up, I don't know, your ideal selves or your best selves. But it's when you really start getting into how do you handle conflict, like that's when you really start seeing who somebody is. When you have to say no to something to someone, you start seeing who that person is and how they can accept your no, and how you can accept theirs. So I've learned so much about it, just relationships in that way, and friendships. I mean, you know, uh, that it makes me more mindful of, because we see someone that we like, even in a friendship way, like that we're kind of attracted to, and we're like, oh my god, and we have all this chemistry and all this stuff is happening neurochemically in our bodies. But like friendship, relationship, all of that is really cemented like through time, um, and practice. So I'm slower now.
That's good. That's important. Everything's a learning curve, right?
Mhm.
And two people, I think relationships are a little bit like GPS. And I have Google Maps and you have Apple Maps.
Mhm.
And we might take different roads and not realize it because we're using different GPS systems. And the TDS sort of makes people at least have the same destination.
Yeah. Yeah, I like.
They might be taking different routes, but they're going to the same place and they know it now, as opposed to sort of not even knowing if you're going to end up in the right place.
Well, and that's so important because I might have my way of getting there and I'm like, no, but I can see and I can point it out and be like, this makes sense, right? But you might have your way too. And if I'm not open to, I love the idea of like, for me to be right doesn't mean that you are wrong. Like I'm all about
Oh,
not making someone wrong. But that's really hard for some people to grasp, like logically. They're like, well, and that's where like right fighting really, I don't feel like serves relationships. I've really gotten away from feeling like I need to be right in any kind of way. I'm much more interested in like where we can meet, you know?
yes. I'm very big on like adopting a learning stance instead of trying to win an argument or to be persuasive. I have very little interest in being persuasive and trying to win anybody over to like my viewpoint or my way of thinking or my methodology. I'd like to explain it. And if you find value in it, I'd love for you to use it too. Like, and I'd like for us to share those kinds of things with each other. That's how we both learn and grow. But as far as winning an argument or being right, it really serves very little purpose. And anytime your conversations are headed in that direction of who's right or wrong, that's a great time to pause and take a step away and maybe come back and reassess and try to ask the person, why are they coming from this direction rather than you should be coming from my direction.
You just said the thing I was going to say, which was like, I start to get curious. And I think that's one of the things I love about this is like, it's an invitation to get curious,
Oh, I
about
love that.
is about like where we align, but like it's just like that notion of curiosity has really, I think, it's expanded my horizons in the last couple of years. And I think it's done such a service to my relationships and made them so much better. I'm curious about myself, but I'm so curious about somebody else. And so when I find, especially in conflict, like that's the best. If you can just like pull back and just get curious, like, whoa, why are we here? Or I wonder how, and just start. Yeah.
Yes, if you can find a way to turn conflict into communication, it's like a superpower. It's the most powerful thing that you can be doing because you'll learn and grow and reconcile the thing. I think often when conflict is occurring, if you can have the wherewithal to pause and then try to look at the situation one level higher. So
Hmm.
it's usually not about the surface level things that are going on. It's not about this particular problem at the moment. It's about something a little bit bigger So if you can zoom out, and that's why priorities are so important, because they help you zoom out. And then if you see a difference, then you can zoom in on that particular topic. So if I'm valuing health right now and it's a high priority and you're not, then I can zoom into why it's not a high priority for you right now. Maybe it's just because you have a good routine and you have a rhythm and you have other things that are higher priorities, not that health isn't an important value to you.
Well, and that makes me think too, like, sometimes what you going on in your world and how you might handle that is, I might have things that are stressful going on in my world, because we all have stress and we all have different coping mechanisms for that, right? And maybe we don't have the same. The example that comes to me is like the whole anxious avoidant, right? Like, so somebody who's more like, when they're stressed, like they really reach for communication and or reach for connection. And like somebody who's more avoidant might pull back and they need more space to kind of like work through it and calm their nervous system and themselves. And when I see like people demonizing, somebody who's more avoidant because they pull away and they need that space, I have such compassion, because I'm like, I do really try to put myself in someone else's shoes and imagine like what that must be like, that for them, it really is just about like, no, I just need to pull back because all of this is stressful. And then I will come back when I feel more regulated. Whereas someone that's more anxious is like reaching out to regulate. And so there's so much goodness in that. Like, that's a good example of like really opposites, because they're opposite in their coping mechanisms too.
That's so true. You're very empathetic, by the way. It's
Oh,
wonderful that you're trying to do that at all times with other people, or when the situations call for it. It's a big deal. So many people just don't put themselves in other people's shoes and really try to understand what the other person is feeling. Sometimes they try to understand what the other person is trying to do rationally, but not how the other person feels or what their emotions are. And that's an important, huge component, because people aren't always rational. We're irrational much of the time. So understanding where that lack of logic is coming from is paramount to having a good communication and relationship.
yeah. And I really do thank you for that. And I do try to not judge people from like the standpoint of my experience. Like, I'm just very aware that like we might be having a very different experience. And so I'm just naturally curious too. Like, I'm curious, and like I wonder what that person's experience is, and understand that it's not like mine. It's very easy to judge somebody from like your experience of the world and say, well, you know, if we could just talk, right? Like, we're having conflict and we could just talk through this right now, then we could work it out. I don't understand why you don't want to do that. And so there's a lot of like fear and judgment in that. And so, but when you take a step back and you're like, okay, that person, but this happens through communication, right? Like, and I've been able to get to this place in my understanding because of like having a partner that I could communicate these differences with, who will then explain to me, well, when you're going through that, I see you, but here's my experience. And then I'm listening and I'm going, oh, we really are very different, you know, but that's
Yes.
okay. And okay, so if that's how you are experiencing it, like, let me sit with that instead of being like, well, you're wrong for being that way.
So true.
Well, let's see. What else can we say about the TDS? When you were doing your research on this, did you just sort of employ this with like you said, you're a relationship coach, right?
Yes. So I employed it with people I'm coaching with. I employed it with everyone I could think of and know. I tried to get as much data as I could to test it out. And what the results of any one test aren't particularly important, like what number someone gets on the TDS. What's important is whether or not it's showing areas of potential conflict, areas for communication. And it just does that every single time. Even if you're listening at home right now and you want to do a quick exercise, just write down your top 3 priorities. They don't have to be from any particular list. Just write down your top 3 priorities, have your partner write down their top 3 priorities, takes a minute, and compare them. You're going to be surprised at what they list, and they're going to be surprised at what you list. just most of the time.
Yeah, that's a great check-in. Like you were saying, like it would be good to like assess even monthly, like even just doing that, even if you didn't go through the whole 10, which it really doesn't take that much time.
No.
But even if you just did your top 3, like what's your top 3 right now? And it can just be a simple check-in like that to see like, where you're at with each other, where you're at with yourselves, but with each other and what's going on.
Yes, it's like asking somebody, how are you? It's
Mhm.
asking them, it's taking time to want to know what's important to them. And that really strengthens connection. Anytime you ask what's important to you and you actually care about the response, that's very valuable. That doesn't really happen in everyday life too often.
Yeah.
Just like people don't genuinely ask you, how are you very often. They do it as a greeting
I am
often.
good. Yeah, I like that. I mean, you could just make it fun too. It doesn't have to be like something that's, difficult or whatever, or, oh, we're going to have this check in and that feels like something that you dread, but it could be fun. It could be like, what are your top 3 right now? You know?
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. You can kind of gamify it.
yeah, yeah, I like that. Um, let's see what else. I want to make sure I have all my questions answered. As I was going
Absolutely.
as I was going through reading this, I had so many notes that I was like highlighting stuff, and I really did enjoy this. I want to say it was an easy read for me,
Oh,
but it just the way that you organized it all was really easy to take in. I think it's very valuable for anybody that's in any kind of relationship, but even just to learn more about yourself. And I think I told you when we talked the first time, this came at like the perfect timing because I was going through some hard things. And so it was like I was reading this going, I needed this right now.
it's so wonderful. Thank you for saying all that. It really means the world to me. Like to have it connect with somebody and to land and to be impactful. That's everything that I could ask for from the book. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
That's really, I mean, I appreciated it from different standpoints. I mean, I do have that sort of like psychological science part of my brain that's like, oh, I love this. I love that he put together this scale to figure this out, like that part of me looking for empirical data. I always love that stuff. But even if that wasn't, I mean, anybody could really pick this up and read it. So, I love that you did this. And thank you for finding me on YouTube. So that we could have this conversation. Because I really like this. I appreciate you sending this to me so that I could. It was just a good timing.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so glad it helped. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. It really means a lot to me that you read it thoroughly and were so thoughtful about it all.
So if listeners are wanting to find your book, where can they find this and learn more?
So they can find Prioritize Us on Amazon. It's an ebook, paperback, hardcover. If this conversation resonated with you and you want deeper support applying these principles, I have a few spots open for coaching, private coaching to help individuals or couples uncover their core priorities, eliminate misalignments, and build a stronger relationship, all their relationships stronger, not just the romantic ones. So if this sounds like something you'd benefit from, you could DM me on Instagram at personal dev coach or visit nickbrancato.com to learn more. I'd love to hear from you. And couples who apply these tools see real changes very fast.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having this conversation with me today. I really enjoyed all of this, just talking about it. And it's been such a pleasure talking with you. So, and thank you to everybody who's joined. And you can find me again on all the things.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of All the Things.